Hi, this is Michael with Interstate PR, back with a whole new world life and business during COVID-19. I am again here in my home office at Interstate PR, and today I have another guest, a good friend of mine. We've been friends for many, many years, actually since elementary school, and our careers have actually taken somewhat similar paths, except for he is working in the public sector and I'm working in the private sector. So I want to bring in my good friend Thomas Reeves, who is the communications manager for the City of Modesto, California, the public information officer, if you will. Thomas, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, Michael.
Hey, thanks for taking the time to come on today. Hey, so Thomas, life's changed a lot in the last few weeks. I can only imagine that things have gotten crazy for you and people in the city of Modesto. Um, Tell me how has your job function changed over the last couple of weeks with this whole COVID-19 situation?
Well, I think first and foremost, everything's out the window. I think, we plan for crises as professional communicators, and you go to trainings, and that's all very helpful. And it's nice to have that as a background. It's nice to have the certifications on the wall. It's nice to be able to say that you've worked with trainers on these type of scenarios. But the reality is, when you actually get into a crisis mode like this, you just have to rely on your colleagues, your networks, and yes, part of your training to be able to get you through it. And I think what I've found communicating at the city government level is that this is like 9 to 5, where it's not 9 to 5 in that it's like round the clock and it's all dealing with COVID-19. It's this is all people care about. This is all people are talking about for weeks. When we are communicating for the city government, we're always communicating about potholes and garbage pickup and water and the senior center hours and all. I mean, it's like there's all sorts of things that you communicate with regards to the city. With a crisis like this is all we're communicating. And we haven't been able to yet turn the dial to start thinking about anything but this. And so I think that's one of the interesting things about communicating in times of a crisis is round the clock, nonstop communication about this one issue. And that's just, it's unique.
Yeah, it's a strange world we live in these days, right? So let me ask you this. I'm sure the city of Modesto has a crisis emergency response team, right? A CERT. Have you guys deployed that for COVID-19? And if you have, what have you deployed, and what can people expect from the city?
Well, I think it's interesting because, yes, the city has its own emergency response team, and we have our own emergency operations center with our own emergency manager as a city. But it's important to remember that the city is usually, especially in California, a party to the larger county emergency operations center. And that takes the lead. The county really does take the lead in terms of responding to an emergency like this with their own emergency operations center from a more global perspective, regionalization of this emergency. And then the city is a part of that. So we started that process. A week or so into this crisis, we realized that we needed to stand up our own emergency operations center with our own emergency manager so that we can ensure that we were operating twofold. One, as a partner with the county on the greater good and the larger perspective, especially since the county is the one that has the county health officer. And of course, all of the direction comes from the doctor as the county health officer, but then also as the city and how we were going to respond as a city to this crisis. So we actually have two emergency response teams going on at the same time. And it's been helpful. We definitely want to make sure that the city's interests are at the forefront of all of our decision making, and of course the health and well-being of our residents.
Yeah, and that's the really big thing right now is the health and well-being of residents and people and that type of stuff. What precautions past, say, the county or the state or the federal government has the city of Modesto looked at, and have you implemented any of those? I know in San Diego, they started requiring that people wear face masks to go outdoors, and they've even started fining and or arresting people. Have you guys looked at that route of requiring the face masks or gloves or anything else for people to wear in public, or is it more of a guideline at this point?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, the reality is we are very far removed geographically, and actually more than just geographically, philosophically and otherwise, from Bay Area cities and in Southern California cities where they have a lot more people, for example. And so for the city of Modesto, one of the largest cities in the Central Valley, this is a quite different scenario for us. It's very interesting to see how our residents and our community is responding to this crisis. And we oftentimes are a little bit late to the party, so to speak, because of that. You'll see communities in the Bay Area and in Southern California that are really ahead of the curve in terms of face masks and shelter in place. And although Modesto was a bit late to the party, we were still actually in front of the county in making that decision. Of course, you have to remember that the county has to make a decision based on the interests and the input of all 9 cities that are a part of the county. And so it was a little easier. We're a little bit more nimble that we can make decisions a little bit more quickly. And so we did put a shelter in place order in before the county, but it was actually after many other jurisdictions did. And the state actually put their shelter in place in the same day. And when it comes to the face mask, face coverings, we are recommending it, but not mandating it. And I think that's a major difference for the residents in the Central Valley. And, one of the other things that's interesting is our enforcement of the shelter in place. We're certainly not citing anyone. And as a matter of fact, with businesses that have stayed open when they shouldn't be staying open, when our law enforcement personnel go to them and simply remind them of this shelter in place, they usually comply without having to go the citation route. And so we're finding compliance, and we're finding that people are using the face coverings even without having to mandate it. And of course, our population is just very different from the larger populations of the Bay Area and the Southern California area.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't realize that the Central Valley, while it does have a lot of people, they're spread out in many different areas, and the cities don't have as much of a population. You have a lot of unincorporated areas and farmland, where the water grows, right? Or where the water flows, stuff grows. And that's really the Central Valley. I guess my next question for you would be this, is we hear so much about testing, and we hear so much about the numbers of people who have this. And I was actually looking today, and this came out of China, right? And we know it came from a bat or bats, but we're not really getting really accurate numbers out of China. It can't be something like 90,000 people caught it in where there's 18% of the world. What do the numbers look like in, say, the city of Modesto? How is testing going? And what's the best way for people to get testing if they feel that they need it, or they've been told by a medical practitioner that they need to go and get tested?
Yeah, I'll be honest, that's one of those areas in this whole crisis that's been a challenge, and it's the data. We're just now starting to get on top of a lot of the data and the reporting that comes along with this crisis. And, this is a new virus for all of us, even the statisticians that are trying to help us and guide us towards data. It's just not easy. And so I got to hand it to the county. They got a lot of pressure and a lot of challenges when it came to reporting and numbers. And of course, early on, it was all about numbers. It was like how many people, and it was, for the Central Valley, it was, even just one case was powerful, because that was strange for us, because we were a bit delayed past the Bay Area and other areas. And so the numbers are important, but it's the whole picture. It's not just number of deaths or number of cases. It's how many tested. It's how many have recovered since then. And all of that information has been a bit of a challenge to get out. And that's because of this idea that so many different organizations are testing. And it's been a challenge, frankly, for our health officer to be able to make sense of who's testing. Can we share those testing numbers? So I think you'll find, when this all looks like, but when this is all over, people are really going to have to come to the table and find out, when this happens again, how can we make sure the numbers are better story? And because there's people all around the world who want to weigh in on this issue of data collection and testing and numbers. And I've seen so many different perspectives and that contradict each other. So it's really hard to even believe numbers that you see. And so that's the unfortunate part about this whole thing. And certainly Modesto is not immune to the challenges that other jurisdictions have, and really the whole globe has, in terms of making sure that it's an accurate picture.
Yeah, it's funny. We live in this data-driven world, yet we're finding that maybe we shouldn't rely so heavily on data to find out what's really going on, or we're not collecting it the ways that we think that we are. Switching course a little bit, you work for the City of Modesto. What does it look like in your offices these days? Is it a ghost town? I mean, how many people do you have come in on a daily basis?
Yeah, it's a good question. We've actually got around 1,500 employees that work for the city, and most of them are working remotely, or at least had been working remotely up until a couple days ago. Very early on, we knew that we needed a stopgap measure to really take inventory of our employees and the essential versus non-essential services that our employees perform, but also the various leaves that are available to employees. And certainly the state and federal government have come out with a lot of help in that regard within the last week or so. And so very early on, we essentially told all the employees, you need to go home, and we're giving you paid administrative leave for it until we figure this thing out. And so that was important. We felt it was necessary to do. Of course, we have hundreds of employees that work out in the field every day and do not normally practice social distancing. That's just not the nature of their work. Potholes and light poles. And for safety, we need groups to be working together. And so it's a very interesting situation that we're in, where we're trying to perform services that are essential for our public, but in much smaller groups, and in some cases even single teams that are going out with a single employee. And so it took us a little while to figure this whole thing out. We were working with 50% on, 50% off for some of the field crews. We were working with different times where one group would come in the morning, another group would come in the afternoon, so that we could practice that social distancing. So now I think we have figured it out a little bit more. And so we have allowed for more employees to come into the office and go to work. But what's important is those employees are not going from their home to the office to pick up their work orders and then out in the field. What we're able to do now with more technology is give them their work orders so that they don't have to come into the office at all. They can go straight from their home to the field to perform those functions. And then when they're in the field, making sure that they're only one person per vehicle, making sure that they are wearing masks if that's appropriate, making sure that they remain distant from the customer and also other employees. So we've got those precautions in place for the field crews that are out there. For those that are not working in the field, we certainly have most of the desk employees, for example, continuing to work remotely, and that has worked pretty well. so that we retain all of the functionality of a city government, performing the operations and services and answering calls, but even remotely. Now, of course, for myself and the city council and the mayor and city manager, we are all here and we're all making sure that that we're functioning appropriately. Although I should say that the city council has been operating now remotely for the last 2 city council meetings, and so we are doing our city council meetings online. The public still has an opportunity to weigh in on items that's just being done via email. And so we're still getting by with just a new way of operating for a while.
Have you found, or has anybody in the city found, that some of these new procedures, because of the whole COVID-19 situation, has actually increased some productivity? Example, you were talking about how field workers, instead of coming into the office to get their work order and then going out and doing it, are now just getting their work order at home, going and getting the job done. Are you guys seeing any increase in productivity because of that? Do you think any of these things will make changes in the future to help increase the productivity of the city, which in essence could make your job a lot easier, reporting on the real positive things that are coming from this, right?
Yeah, certainly that is one way of increasing the productivity, is eliminating the middle step of having to come to the office and simply going straight from your home to the work or to the field. And that is one way. Another way is even with plan check in community and economic development, where of course this is something that should have been done all along, but we have implemented a lot more online features of our plan check process for development. And so that's an important step in the right direction, and that will continue to evolve. But also, even just in the matter of working with your general public in paying their bills and trying to educate from all walks of life and every demographic how easy it is to pay your bills or facilitate a change in your billing or utilities by phone and by email and by online. And so, what we're finding is that people don't need to walk their check into the office and pay that bill. Certainly there's a comfort level in that, and I can appreciate that. But really it's about allowing folks to know that it is safe and secure to perform a lot of functions that need to be performed online and by phone. And all of those are available to our customers and our constituents, whether it's a residential customer or a business customer. So there have been a lot of efficiencies that we've found, and I think that will continue.
I think that's really great, and I think it's a great thing for people to hear. A lot of people think that government is so inefficient, right? But really, local government does a great job at trying to become efficient, and the upper levels kind of follow afterwards. A lot of people don't realize that. Again, switching a little bit different gear, right? From a professional point of view to a personal point of view. I know, like me, you have 3 kids at home who are all school-age children. How is that going for you and your wife, who happens to be a teacher? How is the whole remote education, distant learning thing working? Are you able to get a good work-life balance now that everything is at home?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a sticky question because I would love. I have the ability to work from home as well. I certainly can perform some of my job functions from my home if I choose to stay home once or twice a week. However, I've got a house full of 3 school-age children and a teacher who are also trying to respond to their teachers and respond to their student. Or in my wife's case, respond to her students. And so it's a busy house right now. And so I'm better served, and the public is better served by me being here in the office. The good news is I can keep socially distant from my colleagues and from the residents and constituents here as well. And so the house is busy. Luckily, my kids are old enough that they can flip on the computer and do their Zoom meetings and do their WebEx meetings on their own. And my wife is able to perform her functions as a teacher. It's interesting because my bedroom has turned into a classroom. And so all of my wife's posters and charts that she needs to show her students are on the walls of my bedroom. And so that's also very interesting.
That's got to be fun. I know
Yeah.
like, my wife has her basically set up her office in our kitchen, and she is daily going over with the instructors that she works with on how to use Zoom and that type of stuff. Uh, and it's a little easier for our kids, right? Because they're natives in this. They don't know anything
Oh, sure.
different. You and I, when we grew up, it was being introduced, and we were the early adopters, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a very interesting thing, especially people who are a little more senior than we are.
True.
And I'm sure you probably have that at the city level too, right? How is that working with those? Kind of going back a little bit, how's that working with those employees? What's the learning curve for them, and what's the support that the city is giving them to kind of help them get through this transition that they probably never thought they were going to have to do? I can hear my dad griping right now about potentially having to do this if he hadn't retired. I can hear
Yeah.
your dad griping about it too.
Oh yeah. I mean, my dad has been stuck at home and working in the yard. I mean, he's 85, and he obviously is struggling with this. Trying to get my dad to Skype with me has been a challenge, but we've been able to make it work. And the reality is the CDC has put a lot of helpful information out there in terms of who should be at work, who should remain home, and what essential versus non-essential means. And so we don't necessarily, as a city, as an employer, really have to create anything new in terms of guidelines, because we have a lot of help from the federal government when it comes to who needs to stay home. And that includes those over 65 and those with pre-existing health conditions. And so for those employees, we've been able to really rely on some of the guidance that has come out from health officers to say, look, we need your we need your help, but it needs to be done remotely. And really, there hasn't been any pushback on that. Now, of course, getting them connected is another thing. And as a city with 1,500 employees and a limited budget, it's been a little bit more challenging for us then to outfit everyone with the technology that they need. We don't just have lots of laptops and computers readily available, and we can't assume that all of our employees have those at home. And if they do have them at home, can we mandate that they use their personal equipment for work? And there's a whole bunch of HR questions that our HR team has been trying to work through. And I think it's been able to work out. But, getting them VPNs so that they can actually plug into their folders here at work, all of these things that you don't necessarily think about. What happens when 90% of your workforce now has to perform their functions from their house? Luckily, our IT team has been fantastic in getting that to work, but it is a challenge. And then, of course, setting up our own trainings for all walks of life and demographics on how to use Zoom, how to use WebEx, and those types of things. But I think it's worked out pretty well.
That's good to hear. I know that, we're so dependent on the internet and that type of stuff, but we can tell lately it was never built for this many people to be online doing this much stuff at one time, especially like the video chatting and conferencing. Being able to do this is really cool, right? But if you imagine that your entire neighborhood is doing this and people start wondering, well, why is my internet so slow? Well, there you go.
Right.
It was never built to be like that, right? So I want to be really cognizant of your time. I know it's a Friday afternoon. I know it's Good Friday. What if you were to give one tip to not only the residents of the city of Modesto, but the residents all over that might be watching this? What would it be about working with their local municipality and local governments?
One of the things that I'm trying to wrap my head around as the lead communicator for the city, is how do we start to change the narrative from being doom and gloom to being hope and encouragement? And everyone on the planet is being overloaded with information about COVID-19 right now. And it's a challenge because while it's important for us to make sure that people are informed about what to do and what not to do, while it's important for us to remind people to stay home because it works and wash your hands because it works, we also have to balance in and try and feed in information about hope and encouragement, and we'll get through this, and don't worry and don't stress, and those types of things. And so I think we're finally at a place now where I'm starting to turn the dial a bit, and so our social media channels and our information that we're giving out is a little bit more lighthearted. It brings a little bit more levity to the situation. And so my hope is that our constituents and constituents across the country are starting to, instead of the anxiety and instead of the uncertainty and the worry that comes from, and even fear that comes from this virus that's so unknown at this point, that they start to get that sense of hope. Maybe the city can provide some hope in that regard. And so we're trying to put together, videos and messages of that kind of hope, because we will get through this. And these are unprecedented times. You have to be patient with your local government because we are trying to perform the necessary and essential functions that you're used to and that you expect. Know that our budget for the future is going to be really tight, and there will be cuts across the globe. But even with all of that, we still have reason to hope.
For sure. And I think there is some prudence in the fact that a lot of this is happening around Easter, and during, as a Catholic, during the Lenten season, and kind of an idea of rebirth and rebuild. And as we look at this weekend, which in our faith of Christianity is arguably the most important weekend in the entire year, right? You have Holy Thursday, you have Good Friday. Those don't happen. Easter Sunday never happens. And I think if you really build upon that, you can really get some new perspective in life. And it does bring that hope. And for me and my family, it brings joy, knowing that there is a light at the end of this tunnel, and our faith is helping us get there. And no matter what that light is for us, it's a positive light. So, Thomas, I really, really appreciate you taking the time out of your day doing this. I know we're supposed to get together for lunch sometime soon, but this whole COVID-19 kind of cut that part. So we'll have to get that done after that. But I really, really do appreciate you taking the time out of your day. Please send my best to your family, wife, kids, your parents, your sister. And again, I really, really appreciate you taking the time to come on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Michael. I'll do it anytime for you.
All right, buddy. Thanks, man.